Well, here we are again at the old Triumph Bar and Brewery on a Wednesday arvo, and it's beer o'clock. Good to see you again, my friends. Been thinking a lot about the state of the world and our government and the things they've been wanting us to buy into, the things they've been putting upon us, and the things that they either want us to do and they're leaning on us heavily to do it, or things they say that they're going to make us do if we don't do it, and holding the threat over our head. Friends, we live in an interesting time in history, and at times like this, it doesn't hurt to go back into the past and hear some words of wisdom from the scriptures and where people of God have been at in the past. There's an old story called the Exodus story. You might have seen it in some various movies like the Ten Commandments and that cartoon they made of it back in the 90s, and there's been a few other chops at putting it on screen. You know the old story about the Hebrew slaves getting liberated from hard oppression in Egypt and brought into freedom, and God calling Moses to go and do that. But did you ever wonder how they wound up in slavery in the first place? Well, long before their time, back in the time of a bloke called Joseph, this Hebrew bloke who had been a prisoner wound up being prime minister of the entire nation of Egypt and wound up with power equal to Pharaoh himself. You know, Pharaoh was the king of Egypt. So he made Joseph in charge of just about everything as prime minister. God showed Joseph that there was going to be a 7-year drought and there'd wind up being no tucker, not only in Egypt, but in all the surrounding world. So Joseph knew what to do, and so under Pharaoh's permission, he took action and gathered up food for 7 years so they wouldn't run out of tucker when the drought really bit and became punishing. And so they were well stocked up, and they had enough food reserves there to feed the surrounding world for those 7 years of punishing drought. Now here's the bit that God didn't command Joseph to do. This is how his own people and the people of Egypt wound up in slavery. Listen to this. Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe. The land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. So these people weren't getting food handouts from the generosity of God through Joseph's vision of the future. He was selling it to them until they had no money left. Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house, so he was propping up the government and making them wealthy off the back of those people in a time of natural disaster. When the money from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan was spent, all the Egyptians came to Joseph, so, you know, like we would come to our government these days on Facebook and media and various means, and they said to Joseph, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." And Joseph answered, "Give me your livestock, and I'll give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. In other words, their entire livelihood. That year he supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, "We cannot hide from my lord that our money is all spent and the herds of the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. Shall we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land in exchange for food." Geez, these guys were desperate for tucker, weren't they? "We with our land will become slaves to Pharaoh. Just give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe upon them, and the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made slaves of them all, from one end of Egypt to the other. And so on it goes. How about that? the Hebrews' own people made them and the Egyptians slaves of Pharaoh and turned a profit on it besides. And then it later goes on to say that because he sold them the seed, he expected them not only to be slaves and that the government would own their land, but taxation was now at 20%. A flat rate GST. Gosh, that's pretty harsh, isn't it? They did that out of desperation. They did what the government wanted them to do at a time when it got them literally in the guts. Now, it might have saved their lives, but it not only sold out their freedom, but cost the freedom of generation after generation for 400 years. People rave on about Joseph as he's some kind of hero in the Bible. He's a slaver. God didn't ask him to do that. He gave him the means to save the people. But he turned a profit and he turned people into slaves. That, my friends, is cancerous evil. Our so-called Christian Prime Minister and his so-called Christian government are asking us to do some pretty outrageous things at this time. I don't care what your politics are. Stop and think. Whatever they ask us to do and whatever they offer to give us now, it may get us out of the pinch right now, but are we selling out our freedom? And are we selling out future generations so that they might live in slavery for the next few hundred years? I'm not saying that'll happen, but what I'm asking you to do and what the scriptures are asking you today and always is to stop and think. Well, that's all pretty serious, folks, so it's probably time to knock off and have a beer. I'll catch you on Sunday. Cheers.